They called him a hero. Colleagues praised his precision. Patients trusted him with their lives. But in the hospital corridors of a French hospital, an anesthesiologist was made experiments that would shock the world. For almost 7 years, nobody has noticed. Yeah, like I said, for 7 years, patients died on the operating table. And when the truth finally came up in December 2025, it revealed one of the most chilling medical crimes in the history. The verdict came down like a big hammer. Life imprisonment. Frédéric Péchier, who is a 52-year-old anesthesiologist, was found guilty of poisoning 30 patients and sadly murdering 12 of them. But the question that haunts everyone isn't just what he did. It's how he got away with it for so many years. How does a doctor, sworn to heal, poison the people under his control? And why did it take 7 cardiac arrests and 7 surgeries before anyone became suspicious? The story is beginning in Besançon, a city in France's eastern side, nestled near the Swiss border where medieval architecture meets with modern medicine. The Clinique St. Vincent operated like any other contemporary medical facility. The smell of antiseptic hung in the air. The beeping of monitors created a familiar soundtrack. And in the middle of it all, Frédéric Péchier walked the corridors with confidence. He was very respected. Colleagues sought his advice. Medical students watched him work, hopping to learn from his expertise. He had been practicing for years, his credentials were impeccable, and his demeanor was the picture of calm professionalism. His hands were the steadiest hands on France. His voice was reassuring. Anyone never suspected that the man preparing their anesthesia, the last face they saw before unconsciousness claimed them, might be orchestrating their final moments. Between 2008 and 2017, something unthinkable was happening in his operating rooms. Patients who should have walked out of the clinic days after routine procedures were instead fighting for their lives. Cardiac arrests were occurring with disturbing frequency. Their hearts would stop beating without warning, their blood pressure would plummet to dangerous levels, and chaos would erupt as medical teams scrambled to save them. In those moments, with crash carts rushing in and desperate hands performing chest compressions, nobody was thinking about murder. They were thinking about saving a life. They were thinking about what went wrong with the surgery, what pre-existing condition they might have missed, what freak complication had struck. Murder in a surgical suite. The thought seemed impossible. At first, these incidents seemed like tragic medical complications. After all, surgery always carries risks. A heart can fail. Blood pressure may drop. But as the pattern continued, as more and more patients coded on the table under Péchier's watch, whispers began to circulate through the hospital corridors. Was this bad luck, or was something more sinister at play? The breakthrough came in 2017 when investigators finally examined what had been hiding in plain sight, hanging on 4 poles in every operating room across the clinic. The anesthetic infusion bags. These clear plastic bags of liquid, so commonplace that they become invisible, contained the cocktail of medications that would keep patients unconscious and pain-free during their procedures. Nurses prepared them. Doctors checked them. And Péchier had discovered how to turn them into instruments of death, with nothing more than a syringe and calculated malice. His method was devastatingly simple, which made it all the more terrifying. In the quiet moments before a surgery, when preparation rooms were temporarily empty, when his colleagues were busy elsewhere, Péchier would approach the 4 bags. He would pull out a syringe filled with drugs that should never be combined in those concentrations. Potassium chloride, which could stop a heart in minutes. Adrenaline in doses that would send the cardiovascular system into overdrive. Local anesthetics concentrated far beyond safe levels. He would pierce the sterile bag, inject his poison, and walk away. The evidence of the needle puncture was microscopic, nearly invisible to the casual observer. And when those bags were hung beside unsuspecting patients, when the 4 of the lines were connected and the deadly cocktail began flowing into their veins, their bodies would react exactly as Péchier had calculated. Patients never stood a chance. Imagine lying on that operating table, counting backward from 10 as the anesthesia takes hold, trusting that you'll wake up in recovery with the procedure. You're vulnerable in every possible way, unconscious, stripped of your ability to speak, to call for help, to even understand what's happening to your own body. And as the poison enters your bloodstream, disguised as the very medicine meant to keep you safe, your heart begins to malfunction. The monitors start alarming. Your blood pressure crashes. Medical teams rush in, but they're treating symptoms without understanding the cause. They're trying to save you from what appears to be your own body's failure, never suspecting that someone has deliberately poisoned you. But here's where the story becomes even more disturbing. Why would a doctor do this? What possible motive could drive someone to murder their own patients? The investigation revealed a truth that seems almost too calculated to believe. Péchier was engaged in a territorial war with a rival anesthesiologist at the same clinic. By causing emergencies during his competitor's surgeries, he could position himself as the hero who rushed in to save the day. He was creating chaos to make himself look indispensable, to damage his rival's reputation, and to secure his own position. The patients were collateral damage in his twisted game of professional rivalry. The hospital administration missed every warning sign. 7 cardiac arrests in 7 surgeries performed by the same rival doctor should have triggered immediate investigation. But Péchier was clever. He varied his methods, targeted different surgeries, and maintained his facade of professionalism. When questions were raised, he had explanations. When suspicions emerged, he deflected. He knew exactly how to navigate the system, how to exploit the assumption that doctors are above suspicion. The families of the victims sat in that French courtroom in December 2025, waiting for answers they would never fully receive. Some had lost elderly parents during what should have been minor procedures. Others had watched young family members die on operating tables. For years, they had believed these were medical tragedies, unavoidable complications. Now they knew the truth. Their loved ones had been murdered by the very person sworn to protect them. The grief was compounded by rage, by the knowledge that this could have been prevented if anyone had looked closely enough. The trial itself became a national sensation in France. How could this happen in a modern healthcare system? Where were the checks and balances? The prosecution presented devastating evidence. Toxicology reports showing impossible drug concentrations in victims' bodies. Testimony from nurses who had noticed Péchier's suspicious behavior. Video footage placing him near the anesthesia preparation areas at critical times. And most damning of all, the pattern. When Péchier wasn't working, the cardiac arrests stopped. When he returned, they resumed. The correlation was undeniable. But Péchier maintained his innocence throughout, claiming he was being framed, that the evidence was circumstantial, that the real killer had never been found. His defense argued that the hospital was using him as a scapegoat to cover up systemic failures in patient care. They pointed to poor record-keeping, inadequate supervision, and a culture that discouraged questioning senior doctors. And while these criticisms weren't entirely wrong, they couldn't explain away the mountain of evidence connecting Péchier to the poisonings. This case forces us to confront uncomfortable questions about the medicals. We trust doctors with absolute power over our lives when we're most vulnerable. We assume they're motivated by compassion and bound by ethics. But what happens when that trust is weaponized? Péchier isn't the first medical professional to abuse their position. History is littered with similar monsters. Dr. Harold Shipman in Britain murdered over 200 patients. Dr. Michael Swango in America poisoned dozens. These aren't isolated incidents. They're exposures of a darker truth about how easily trust can be exploited when proper oversight is absent. The workers who finally came forward described a culture of silence. Junior staff who noticed irregularities were told not to question senior doctors. Concerns were dismissed as inexperience or anxiety. The hierarchy of medicine, which exists to ensure clear decision-making in emergencies, had become a shield for a killer. And by the time anyone was brave enough to push past that hierarchy, 12 people were already dead. The sentencing in December 2025 brought some measure of closure, but the questions linger. How many victims were there really? The investigation only covered cases where clear evidence existed, but Péchier had been practicing for decades. How many unexplained deaths during his career might have been murders? We'll probably never know. The families will carry that uncertainty forever, wondering if their losses were among the unproven cases, the ones that fell through the cracks of investigation. What makes this case particularly haunting is its ordinariness. Péchier wasn't a noticeable psychopath. He wasn't violent or unstable. He was a respected professional who went home to his family every night. His neighbors never suspected anything. His friends described him as a good person, even charming. This is what evil often looks like in our world these days. Not a monster, but a person in a position of power who makes decisions that other lives matter less than their own. The French medical community has been forced into painful self-examination. New protocols are being implemented. Anesthesia preparation areas now require multiple witnesses. Drug inventories are tracked more carefully. But can any system truly protect against someone determined to cause harm from the inside? Péchier had access, knowledge, and the trust of everyone around him. He knew exactly how to exploit every weakness in the system. As the courtroom emptied after that verdict, Péchier was led away to begin his life sentence. The families of his victims faced the truth. Justice had been served, but it couldn't bring back the victims. It couldn't erase the years of trust betrayed, the moments when they had thanked this man for trying to save their loved ones, never knowing he was the one who had endangered them in the first place. The scars of this betrayal run deeper than any physical wound. They challenge our fundamental assumptions about the people we trust with our lives. The case of Frédéric Péchier stands as a stark reminder that the darkest crimes often happen in the brightest places, committed by people we least suspect, protected by systems designed to help rather than harm. And sometimes, the most terrifying monsters don't lurk in shadows. They wear white coats and ask us to trust them with everything we have.